In the desolate landscape of a world torn apart, Jack stood motionless, his 12-year-old eyes scanning the endless horizon of destruction. The city around him was no longer a vibrant metropolis, but a skeletal reminder of humanity's fragility. Concrete structures crumbled like ancient ruins, twisted metal jutting out like broken bones of a forgotten civilization. How does a child survive when everything he knew has been erased? The silence was overwhelming, punctuated only by the occasional distant sound of wind moving through abandoned buildings. Jack's hands, small but already calloused from weeks of survival, clutched a worn backpack, his only connection to the life he once knew. Inside, a few precious items, a photograph of his parents, a half-empty water bottle, and a small knife that had become his lifeline. Memories flickered through his mind like broken film reels. The day everything changed had come suddenly, without warning. One moment, the world was normal: school, family dinners, weekend soccer games. The next, chaos erupted. Pandemics, conflicts, environmental disasters, a perfect storm of human destruction that unraveled civilization faster than anyone could have imagined. What drives a child to survive when all hope seems lost? Jack had discovered that survival was more than just finding food or shelter. It was about maintaining a spark of humanity in a world that had forgotten what that meant. Each step he took was a defiance against the total collapse of everything he once believed in. The ruins around him told a story of loss and desperation. Abandoned cars lined the streets, their windows shattered, interiors stripped bare by desperate survivors. Vegetation had begun to reclaim the urban landscape, with weeds pushing through cracked concrete, a silent testament to nature's resilience. Jack understood now that survival was not about strength, but about adaptation. His mind wandered to the small group of survivors he had encountered weeks ago. 15 souls, each carrying their own trauma, their own story of loss. Children, elderly, young adults, all united by the simple desire to live, to find meaning in a world that seemed determined to extinguish their existence. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the devastated landscape, Jack knew that night would bring its own challenges. Survival was a moment-to-moment negotiation with a world that no longer followed any predictable rules. Every sound could be a threat, every shadow a potential danger. He thought about his parents, about the lessons they had taught him before everything fell apart. Kindness, resilience, hope. These were not just words anymore, they were survival skills. In a world where civilization had crumbled, these human qualities would become more precious than any material possession. The wind picked up, carrying with it the dust of 1,000 forgotten stories. Jack adjusted his backpack, checked the small knife at his side, and took another step forward. Each step was a statement, a declaration that he was not defeated, that humanity could rebuild, that hope was not lost. As darkness began to envelope the ruined cityscape, one question burned in Jack's mind: what does it truly mean to survive? The memories of Jack's past were like fragmented glass, sharp and painful when touched. His mind drifted back to the moments before everything collapsed, replaying scenes that now seemed like distant dreams from another lifetime. The first signs of societal breakdown had been subtle: whispers of conflict, rumors of global tensions, strange reports on television that nobody took seriously until it was too late. His father, a military veteran with keen instincts, had been the first to recognize the impending disaster. Late-night conversations, hushed discussions, emergency supplies quietly stockpiled in their basement. These were the final preparations that would ultimately save Jack's life, though they could not save his family completely. The day of total collapse came with a terrifying suddenness. Sirens wailed across the city, communication networks crumbled, and panic spread faster than any virus could. Jack remembered his mother's hands trembling as she packed a small bag, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Stay close," she had whispered, a phrase that would become his survival mantra. Within hours, the world they knew disappeared. Infrastructure collapsed, governments lost control, and the thin veneer of civilization peeled away to reveal the raw, brutal nature of human survival. Jack watched as neighbors turned against each other, resources became weapons, and the social contracts that had held society together disintegrated like wet paper. His parents' final act of love was creating a chance for him to survive. They had taught him skills, hidden supplies, and instilled in him a resilience that would become his greatest strength. The night they were separated was etched into his memory, a chaotic scene of violence, separation, and ultimate loss. Jack had learned quickly that grief was a luxury survival could not afford. Each moment of mourning could mean missed opportunities, overlooked dangers. The pain of loss became a fuel, a driving force that pushed him forward when everything else wanted him to give up. The memories of his family were both a burden and a blessing. Their lessons echoed in his mind with every decision he made, every strategy he developed. Survival was no longer about individual existence, but about carrying forward the hope and humanity they had instilled in him. As the night deepened and Jack found a temporary shelter in the ruins of an abandoned building, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. Tears were not a sign of weakness, but a testament to the love he had lost and the strength he was building. What does a child become when everything familiar is stripped away? Jack was about to find out. The convergence of survivors was not a planned event, but a series of desperate encounters that slowly transformed individual struggles into a collective hope. Jack discovered that survival was less about individual strength and more about the intricate web of human connection that could emerge from the most devastating circumstances. Their first meeting was raw and uncertain. 15 souls, each carrying their own trauma, their own story of loss, found themselves drawn together by an unspoken understanding of shared survival. There was Emily, an elderly nurse with hands that had healed countless wounds; Michael, a teenager who had lost his entire family; Sarah, a young mother protecting her infant daughter; and various others, each bringing a unique set of skills and experiences. Trust did not come easily. In a world where betrayal could mean instant death, every interaction was a careful dance of caution and necessity. Jack quickly realized that leadership was not about commanding, but about listening. Each person carried knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death. The initial days were a crucible of human adaptation. They learned to share resources, to create makeshift systems of protection and communication. Water became more precious than gold, food a constant negotiation, and safety a collective responsibility. Jack found himself at the center of this emerging community, not by choice, but by a natural emergence of leadership. Conflicts were inevitable. Different personalities, different survival strategies, different levels of hope. These created friction that threatened to tear the group apart. But beneath the surface tensions, a deeper understanding was forming. They were no longer just survivors, they were becoming a family forged in the fires of absolute destruction. Jack observed how human beings could transform in the face of extreme circumstances. The elderly nurse who seemed fragile became their primary medical resource. The angry teenager became their most vigilant lookout. The young mother's determination became a source of inspiration for everyone. Communication became their most powerful tool. They developed a system of signals, shared responsibilities, and created a rudimentary governance that balanced individual needs with collective survival. Each person had a role, each person was valuable. As night fell and they gathered around a carefully concealed fire, Jack understood that survival was more than just avoiding death. It was about maintaining humanity, about creating meaning in a world that had lost all previous structures. What does it take to rebuild when everything has been destroyed? How do human beings find hope in the absolute darkness of total collapse? The group huddled together, a small flame of hope flickering against the vast darkness of their new reality. They were no longer just individuals, they were a living, breathing organism of survival. Jack looked around at the faces illuminated by the firelight. Each person was a story, each person was a possibility. And in that moment, survival seemed not just possible, but inevitable. Survival revealed itself not as a heroic journey, but as a relentless series of mundane challenges that tested every ounce of human resilience. Each day became a complex negotiation between immediate needs and long-term survival strategies. Food, water, shelter, protection, these were no longer abstract concepts, but daily battles that required constant vigilance and creativity. Jack quickly understood that knowledge was their most valuable resource. The group's initial attempts at foraging were chaotic and dangerous. They learned the hard way that not all plants were edible, that water needed careful purification, and that every movement outside their temporary shelter could attract unwanted attention. Mistakes could be fatal. The abandoned urban landscape became their hunting ground and classroom. Abandoned supermarkets, once temples of consumer convenience, now served as critical resource centers. But these were not simple scavenging missions. Each expedition required careful planning, lookouts, and a complex system of communication that they developed through trial and error. Conflicts within the group became their first true test of collective survival. Different personalities, different levels of fear, different survival strategies created tensions that threatened to tear them apart. The elderly nurse challenged the younger members' reckless approaches. The angry teenager questioned every decision. The young mother's protective instincts sometimes clashed with the group's broader survival needs. Jack found himself in an unexpected role of mediator and leader. Leadership, he discovered, was not about giving orders, but about listening, understanding, and finding common ground. He learned to read people's fears, to understand the unspoken tensions, to create solutions that addressed everyone's fundamental needs. Their first successful shelter was a testament to human adaptability. An abandoned warehouse transformed into a protected space, with carefully constructed barriers, hidden entry points, and a system of early warning signals. They learned to move silently, to create minimal traces of their existence, to become almost invisible in a world that had become inherently dangerous. Water became their most critical resource. They developed rainwater collection systems, learned to purify water through multiple methods, and created strict conservation protocols. Each drop became precious, each source a potential lifeline. The challenges were not just external. Psychological survival became as critical as physical survival. They developed evening sharing circles, where each member could express their fears, their hopes, their memories. These moments became crucial for maintaining group cohesion and individual mental health. Jack observed how humans could transform in the face of absolute adversity. Fear could paralyze, but it could also activate incredible reserves of creativity and resilience. Each challenge became a learning opportunity, each failure a potential path to future success. As weeks passed, they began to function less like a random group of survivors and more like a sophisticated survival unit. Each person's strengths became amplified, each weakness compensated by collective support. What defines human survival? Is it merely about continuing to breathe, or is it about maintaining hope, creating meaning, rebuilding connection in a world that has been completely destroyed? The group huddled together, a living testament to human adaptability. their collective breath a quiet defiance against total destruction. The moment of confrontation arrived with a brutal suddenness that shattered their carefully constructed sense of security. Survival had taught them vigilance, but nothing could have fully prepared them for the raw intensity of a direct threat. The first warning came as a distant sound, something between a human cry and mechanical movement that sent immediate shivers through the group. Jack's training from his father, those hushed lessons about survival and protection, crystallized in an instant. His body moved with a precision that belied his young age, signaling silent alerts to the group. Eyes became weapons, ears transformed into sophisticated detection systems, every muscle coiled with potential energy. The attacking group appeared like a nightmare materialized, rough, desperate survivors who had long abandoned any semblance of humanity. Their approach was calculated, predatory, seeing Jack's group not as fellow humans but as resources to be conquered. Weapons cobbled together from industrial debris, vehicles modified into weapons of intimidation, a collective hunger that went beyond mere physical need. Strategic positioning became their first line of defense. The elderly nurse created makeshift medical preparation areas. The teenagers became lookouts, their young eyes scanning horizons with unexpected intensity. Sarah, the young mother, became a silent guardian of the most vulnerable members, her protective instinct turning her into a fierce warrior. Jack's leadership transformed in that moment. He was no longer just a child surviving, but a strategic commander understanding that their survival depended on collective action. Communication became almost telepathic, hand signals, predetermined codes, a complex dance of defensive positioning. The attack was not just physical, but psychological. These were not simply enemies seeking resources, but broken humans who had lost everything, whose humanity had been stripped away by months of brutal survival. Jack understood that this was a battle of will, of strategy, of collective human spirit. Their defense was not about violence, but about preservation. Each movement calculated, each action designed to protect, to survive, to maintain their small community's integrity. The warehouse became a fortress, every object a potential weapon, every space a potential defensive position. Hours stretched like an eternity. Tension became a living entity, moving through their collective consciousness. Fear was present, but it did not paralyze, instead, it sharpened their collective resolve. When the confrontation reached its peak, it was not brute force that saved them, but intelligence, strategy, and an unbreakable sense of collective purpose. They did not defeat the attackers through overwhelming strength, but through a sophisticated understanding of human dynamics, of psychological warfare, of strategic positioning. The aftermath was a complex emotional landscape. Victory felt hollow, survival felt fragile. They had defended themselves, but at what psychological cost? Each member carried the weight of those moments, the understanding that survival sometimes demanded sacrifices beyond the physical. Jack looked around at his group, no, his family. They were not just survivors anymore. They were a living testament to human resilience, to the extraordinary capacity of humans to protect, to adapt, to hope. What defines true strength in a world stripped of civilization? Is it the ability to fight, or the ability to maintain humanity in the face of absolute destruction? The silence after the attack was not a silence of defeat, but a silence of profound understanding. Reconstruction was not a moment, but a patient, deliberate process of reimagining survival. The aftermath of the attack had stripped away their last illusions of temporary existence, replacing them with a profound understanding that they were no longer just surviving, but building something meaningful. Their territory became more than a simple shelter, it transformed into a living organism of human potential. Abandoned spaces were methodically converted into functional areas. An old warehouse section became a hydroponic garden, another a medical station, another a communal living space. Every square meter was a testament to human creativity and resilience. Jack observed how each member of the group discovered their unique contribution. The elderly nurse's medical knowledge became their primary healthcare system. Michael, once an angry teenager, became their primary engineer, developing innovative water filtration and energy collection systems. Sarah's protective instincts translated into educational programs for the younger members, ensuring knowledge transfer became their most critical survival strategy. Agricultural development became their primary focus. They transformed urban ruins into productive growing spaces, learning hydroponics, vertical gardening, and sustainable cultivation techniques. Each plant represented more than food, it was a symbol of hope, of renewal, of human capacity to create life in the most challenging environments. Their governance system evolved organically. No longer a simple survival group, they developed a sophisticated decision-making process that balanced individual needs with collective survival. Daily meetings became forums of collective intelligence, where every voice was heard, where strategy was developed through collaborative thinking. Training became a critical component of their new society. Everyone learned multiple skills: medical response, agricultural techniques, defensive strategies, communication protocols. Specialization existed, but redundancy was key. Each member could step into multiple roles if necessary, a living, breathing adaptive system. Psychological healing became as important as physical survival. Evening sharing circles evolved into structured therapeutic sessions, where trauma was acknowledged, processed, and transformed into collective strength. They understood that emotional resilience was as critical as physical survival. Their defensive strategies became more sophisticated. Early warning systems, communication protocols, strategic positioning, these were no longer desperate measures, but carefully developed systems of protection. They were not just defending themselves, but creating a model of human adaptation. Jack's leadership transformed. He was no longer just a survival coordinator, but a visionary understanding that they were building more than a survival group. They were creating a blueprint for human reconstruction. Each decision was made not just for immediate survival, but with consideration of long-term human potential. The world outside remained dangerous, unpredictable. But inside their territory, a different reality was emerging, a reality of hope, of collective intelligence, of human potential reimagined. What emerges when humans are stripped of all previous structures? What new possibilities can be created from absolute destruction? Their community was not just surviving. They were evolving, creating a new understanding of human potential, a living laboratory of adaptation and hope. The ruins around them were no longer just destruction. They had become the foundation of something entirely new. The dawn broke differently now, not as a reminder of loss, but as a promise of possibility. Jack stood at the edge of their reconstructed territory, watching the first rays of sunlight illuminate the transformed landscape. What had once been a scene of absolute destruction was now a testament to human resilience, creativity, and unbreakable spirit. Their community had become more than a survival group, it was a living, breathing ecosystem of human potential. The gardens they had cultivated now produced enough food to not just sustain them, but to begin thinking about expansion. Water collection systems, initially designed for bare survival, now operated with scientific precision. Solar panels cobbled together from abandoned technology provided consistent energy. But the true transformation was not in the physical infrastructure, but in the human spirit that had emerged. Each member had discovered depths of strength they never knew existed. The elderly nurse who once seemed fragile now led comprehensive medical training. Michael, once an angry teenager, had become their primary engineer and innovator. Sarah's protective instincts had evolved into a sophisticated educational system that ensured their knowledge would survive beyond their immediate group. Jack reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Survival was no longer about avoiding death, but about creating life. They had not just survived the collapse of civilization, they were actively rebuilding a new form of human community. Their governance was collaborative, their resources shared, their potential unlimited. Communication with other survivor groups had begun, carefully, strategically. They were not just protecting themselves, but creating networks of hope, sharing knowledge, rebuilding human connection. Each successful interaction was a small victory against the total destruction they had experienced. The children born and raised in this new world knew nothing of the old civilization. Their education was practical, holistic, understanding not just survival skills, but the deeper principles of human cooperation, environmental stewardship, and collective intelligence. They were the first generation of a potentially new human paradigm. Jack's leadership had transformed from survival management to vision casting. He understood now that true leadership was about creating possibilities, about seeing potential where others saw only destruction. The scars of loss remained, but they had become sources of strength rather than weakness. As the sun reached its zenith, casting light across their reconstructed world, Jack allowed himself a moment of reflection. They had not just survived, they had reimagined what it meant to be human. Each challenge had been a lesson, each loss an opportunity for growth, each moment of difficulty a chance to discover their true potential. What emerges when humanity is stripped of everything? What new possibilities can be created from absolute destruction? Their community was a living answer to that question, a beacon of hope in a world that had been destroyed, now slowly being rebuilt. One moment, one decision, one human connection at a time. The horizon was no longer a reminder of what was lost, but a canvas of what could be created. Hope was not just surviving. Hope was building.